All right, ladies and gentlemen, we just want to apologize for that minor technical glitch. We'll let the viewers come back in. Do apologize for that. Apparently the stream had stopped on YouTube, so we had to sort of duck out and make sure that stream was working properly to ensure that everyone can properly watch the show. So we were in the middle of a conversation on Bills Embedded takeaways. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis. I am joined by Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. We are the Bills guys, part of the Buffalo Fanatics podcasting network. And we are back live on Facebook, Periscope, YouTube. Thank you for the viewer that let us know that the stream went out. We do thank you for that. And we got right back on about a minute later. So hopefully all is well now. Our biggest takeaways from Bills Embedded, number one, was obviously the Gabe Davis piece and that conversation between didn't pay your internet bills. Thank you. I appreciate that's funny. The biggest takeaways I think that we had was the Gabe Davis conversation between Joe Shane and Brandon Beane, where Brandon Beane turned to Joe Shane and said, like, listen, as long as this guy runs a decent 40, I already like him because of the tape. And Brandon Beane made that very clear last year in his interview with The Athletic with Matthew Fairburn. It's tape first, it's tape second, it's tape third, then it's combines, then it's interviews, things like that. So the tape is very important to Brandon Beane when making his final assessment on players. Mm-hmm. Now there's an issue on Facebook. So the technical difficulties are real today. So we do apologize for some of the Facebook people, but the YouTube and the Periscope rolls on. Any other takeaways from Embedded? We know they like their football guys. Anything else stick out to you in Embedded?
Well, you know what I also thought was interesting was like how integrated into these pre-draft interviews the second tier of the coaching staff was, right? Mm-hmm. How, it wasn't just Beane and McDermott there. Leslie Frazier was there. Dable was there. Then you even saw Chad Hall getting in the mix, talking to Gabe Davis. So it seemed like a real connected and well-oiled machine. Seemed like that they were really, the collective staff is really valued from top to bottom, right? McDermott's really valuing the input of everyone on his staff. And I thought that was really interesting to see in those interviews.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It was what also stuck out to me was they were frantically trying to trade up for Moss. So it seems to me when they fall in love with guys, like they fall hard. And we've seen that from Brandon Beane in the past. He was trying to get up for Ed Oliver when Oliver fell to him. He was trying to get up for Zach Moss. He tried to get up. He did get up for Josh Allen. He did get up for Tremaine Edmonds. So the Buffalo Bills are falling for guys, and they're falling hard for guys. So the Bills Embedded series really did help, I think, reinforce a lot of what we already know about this staff. And like you said, the position coaches were involved. Mm-hmm. You saw all the scouts in the background in Indy, Terry Pagula. It really is sort of like a communal decision-making process. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about this Buffalo Bills team. It's not Dallas where Jerry Jones can, drink a little too much bourbon and make his own decisions on draft day. Like, it's not Adam Gase
from his super yacht,
full control over his roster and butts head with the GM and tries to get him fired. Everyone in Buffalo, at least the Buffalo Bills, not so much the Buffalo Sabres, but at least the Buffalo Bills, everyone in Buffalo on the Buffalo Bills front office and then the Buffalo Bills coaching staff is on the same page. And that's something you really do like to see. You really like to see it reinforced in Bills Embedded. All right. Before we move on to our next topic, if you are looking for some new Buffalo Bills gear, head over to the BF Fan Shop, and you can get any of the amazing Bills gear that is there, the Mr. Process shirt, the You Dig shirt, all that stuff. Promo code Bills, guys, 10% off. So if you're looking for anything in the BF Fan Shop, 10% off, use the promo code Bills, guys, BILLSGUYS. All right, our biggest topic for today, Dave, is going to be the secondary. We're going to be talking all about the secondary. That's the theme of our show today. And the first topic we're going to, bounce around here is, what is the confidence in the secondary heading into 2020? So for you, what is your confidence level in our secondary heading into the year 2020?
I don't know what kind of rating scale you're going to use, but I'll say very high. If there's like a scale of 0 to 100, I think it's in the 90s, right? Like it's somewhere in that range. So, and the reason I say this is because of the consistency of the personnel, the consistency of the coaching staff, and the fact that, again, we have added a couple pieces, maybe the signing of Josh Norman adds something to the room. He's got something to prove, brings competition to Levi Wallace. So my confidence in the secondary is pretty sky high going into 2020. The starting, 4 of the secondary, like we'll debate Wallace versus Norman a little bit later, but between White and Hyde and Poyer, I mean, you have an all-pro corner, you have 2 Pro Bowl type safeties, fantastic tandem back there at safety. So confidence for me is quite high.
Yeah, I mean, sky high, but here's the kicker. Even though I like our secondary depth, I will say if healthy, because I mean, Poyer and Hyde, the disrespect for those two is real. They might not be the best safeties individually in football, but together they're top 5. They got to be a top 5 tandem in the National Football League because of the comment that Michael Bond Walker made here. And that's they really are. Those two are so in sync. Their chemistry is real. Like they know what each other is doing and they understand the system and they understand the scheme and they work so well off of each other. So Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer back there working in tandem to go along with Trey White, who's a top 5 corner in football. You can make an argument that he's even higher. Maybe he's number 2 behind, Stephon Gilmore. Those are 3, elite players in that secondary. So the question you got to ask yourself is, are Josh Norman and Levi Wallace enough to get by? I think they are. How are your sub packages defenders? We saw Saran Neal have some success. We saw Teron Johnson have some success. We saw Jaquan Johnson have some success even late in the year. So you like some of those pieces, Dean Marlowe, you like some of those pieces, but if Trey White gets hurt, is Josh Norman able to get by if it's Levi Wallace across from him? If Jordan Poyer gets hurt, or if Micah Hyde get hurt for an extended amount of time, for a couple weeks here or there, that might be fine. But, say Jordan Poyer misses half the season. Can Jaquan Johnson fill in seamlessly? And is Micah Hyde still as effective without Jordan Poyer next to him for an extended period of time? So I agree with, Caleb Brooks. The defense is going to go crazy this year, but we were one of the healthiest teams in football last season. And if we can't stay that healthy, maybe it comes down a little bit. So sometimes a little bit of luck has to do with it. But I think if healthy, which I guess you can't predict injuries and, it's sort of cynical to sit here and think about injuries. So for me, like you said, sky high, expectations because of, everything you and I mentioned. I mean, there is some elite talent back there, and that makes up for maybe guys like, Josh Norman and, Levi Wallace maybe not being at the elite level as the other 3. So, sorry, you have one more comment?
No, let's keep it rolling.
All right. I want to talk a little bit now about Trey White's future beyond his rookie contract. Because if you look at the way that the Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have built their secondaries over, their tenure in Buffalo and the way they did it in Carolina, you start to see a pattern sort to reveal itself. I mean, it's in almost 10 years in Carolina, Brandon Beane, the biggest investment he ever made in the secondary in Carolina was James Bradbury in round 2. He always relied on mid-rounders and sort of middle-of-the-road free agents to build his secondary there in Carolina. Now, he was the assistant GM. He wasn't the GM, but there's sort of a track record there when he was in a somewhat of a position of power in Carolina to not invest too heavily in the secondary. The cornerback number 2 since Sean McDermott arrived in town has been E.J. Gaines, Vontae Davis, Phillip Gaines, Levi Wallace, and Kevin Johnson. Again, not really big investments, guys who were on the tail end of their careers, guys who were coming off injuries, guys who were signed to 1-year contracts, not huge investments, UDFAs. Hyde and Poyer were both value free agent signings. They weren't really highly thought of when the Buffalo Bills signed them. And they were transitioning to safety from cornerback. So Sean McDermott got some value there as well. I mean, this appears to be a position group that Sean McDermott thinks he can sort of mold and sort of take these assets, and he doesn't need assets to establish a good secondary. And, they signed Josh Norman early, other than, Jalen Johnson. I didn't really see them connected to any cornerbacks in the draft. They passed on Christian Fulton for AJ Epinesa. So should we be worried about Trey White's future beyond his rookie contract, the way that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have been building their secondaries?
I mean, you can look at the way they handled Josh Norman when he was in Carolina. I mean, like you said, Bean wasn't the general manager then when he walked out the door and they didn't pay him. But, there is some parallel there. I do think Trey White's going to be a priority for this front office. And I say that because when Norman was in Carolina, when he left, yes, he was a great player on their defense, but you had some established leadership right there on the defense, right? I believe Kuechly might have been there at that point already. You had an aging, defense, but you also had guys like Cam Newton leading the team. So from a leadership perspective, I don't think like he was as relied upon to be like a team leader. And I think that's the difference here with Trey White. Like Trey White is a team leader. Like he's a team leader on the defense. He's, he's kind of like that entertainment factor as well. We've seen him with some of his things that he does, like the Trey White Goalie Academy. To me, like he is integrated into Buffalo a lot more than I think Josh Norman was integrated into Carolina, into the community. So I think that the Bills will do right by Trey White and invest in him. I think that you're right about the draft, right? They haven't really necessarily invested big draft capital, but you have to remember Bean wasn't here. The very first pick that McDermott made in the first round was Trey White, right? So that was still obviously with Whaley, but he was gone after the draft, but the very first pick. So there is something to be said there, I think, for that that was your first guy that you took, and he's been so great for you. He's been an all-pro. So for me, this to me should be the first shoe that drops when it comes to the Bills sort of re-signing their own drafted. Like we've seen them throw money at Micah Hyde coming over from Green Bay. We've seen them, give money to the likes of Cole Beasley and John Brown, but this would be the first big money that this regime has thrown to a guy that they've actually drafted and groomed. So I think they will do that. That will set the tone for the rest of the roster, that as far as guys that they have drafted, in-house guys. And I think that they will do right by Trey White, and he will get paid. Now, the question is when, right? That's going to be the big question. But I'm not over worried about the Bills wanting to pay him. I worry about other things, like is Trey White going to hold out? Is he going to wait till the last minute to sign? Like, is he going to want to test free agency? Those are the types of things I worry about. But I don't worry about the Bills' interest in re-signing him.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about it, I don't think it's something that we have to worry about in the immediate future because he's still got the 4th year of his contract. We picked up his 5th year option, and then the franchise tag is going to be something the Bills can honestly feasibly utilize for about 2 years. So you're looking at the next 4 years where Trey White is pretty much locked into Buffalo. The issue that you run into is, does he hold out? Does he start to make a scene with the media? These are not things that I think we have to worry about with Trey White. He seems like a good, reasonable guy. He doesn't seem like he's going to have some of those issues. But I think to the point that was on the screen earlier, you are going to see the Bills not make the same mistake that maybe the regimes in past years did with like letting Stephon Gilmore go. Or in Carolina. Carolina, I don't think made a mistake letting Josh Norman walk to Washington. But that being said, Trey White is a freak athlete who's also a very good corner. Josh Norman was not a freak athlete who sort of like the scheme made him into a really good corner. So the scheme made him elite. His instincts made him elite, but physically he wasn't an elite player. Trey White adds the physicality to the scheme and to the instincts, which makes him an over the top sort of elite player, which is the kind of guy that, number one, you're going to want to pay, because he's going to probably last longer than Josh Norman did. The second is, what did Carolina do after Josh Norman left? They weren't making Super Bowl runs. They might have made a few more playoffs, but I really think that hurt the locker room. I think that sent the wrong message to the locker room when they let a guy who proved himself in Carolina leave at a relatively young age. So I don't think the Bills are going to make the same mistake with Trey White that Carolina did with Josh Norman in those regards. I think ability-wise, Carolina made the right move, but I think locker room wise, they made the wrong move. And I think that the right move for Buffalo would be, because Trey White, I think, can extend his career longer maybe than Josh Norman did, play at a higher level longer than Josh Norman did, would be to give him that extension. And you've seen them re-up Jordan Poyer and pay Jordan Poyer. So even though, Jordan Poyer was a free agent signing, they're still proving that they're willing to pay those guys in the back half of the secondary. So whether the Buffalo Bills are going to go out and use the outlandish assets to add a cornerback number 2 to Trey White in the future, I doubt it. But I think that they will pay up and they will give Trey White money to be the number one corner in Buffalo. I don't think we have anything to be concerned about. All right. That brings us on to our next topic, which is going to be the guy who's playing opposite Trey White, the guy who's playing opposite your franchise cornerstone player. It's going to be either Josh Norman or Levi Wallace for cornerback number 2. Who's your betting favorite to win the roster spot, Dave?
My betting favorite's Josh Norman, right? You gave him the $6 million for 1 year. I think you're not giving him a 1 year, $6 million deal you're giving him that money to compete for that job, yes, but I think the expectation by giving him that money is that he will win that job. And I do think he will win that job. I think talent-wise, he's more talented than Levi Wallace. He's a better athlete than Levi Wallace. And I think that Norman's coming into this season. Look, he's on a 1 year deal. He's coming off, a situation like, Daniel mentioned. He went to a poorly run organization and it wasn't a great fit for him. He obviously took the money, which is fine, but he's now going back into a situation where he's comfortable with the system. It's a system where he's excelled in the past. Do I think he's going to be the level that he was at when he was at Carolina? No, I think that's unreasonable to expect that, but I do think it's reasonable to expect that he will bounce back at least to a proportion of what he was when he was in Carolina and provide us very serviceable, solid play as a number 2. And then if and when something were to happen to one of our top 2 guys, you have a guy like Levi Wallace who's been in the system who can come in and fill in as your backup boundary corner. So I think with the chip Josh Norman's going to have on his shoulder, you've seen his competitive juices get flowing in games. I just feel like he's got more of that edge to him than a Levi Wallace does. Maybe Levi just hasn't shown it yet. Maybe he does have it in him, but I think the edge that Josh Norman's going to bring in practice and in camp and on the field during game days and the chip that he's going to have coming in, trying to prove that he's still got ability, is going to win out for him as the number 2.
Yeah. We got a comment here from Amy Polakowski. You guys are awesome. I love that it's on video now instead of the pod, although I love the pods too. So thank you, Amy. We really appreciate that. And I also love the dialogue that's going on in the chat right now. We have, Chris and Ron going back and forth between Josh Norman and Levi Wallace. We love it, guys. Keep it going. We're getting better at this. So we're always going to try to embed your chats as much as possible. Get
great comment here.
Feedback, in there.
Great comment here from Steven too. This is like exactly what I was kind of saying, right? If we get 65-70% of what we got of the Carolina Josh Norman, it'll be a win. And I agree with Steven here. I think that's a great comment.
Yeah. And Paul made a great comment too that I want to get to next before we jump on to the next topic. But I'll tell you what, I agree with you. I think that Josh Norman, he's got the edge because he's got the experience. He's been playing for a really long time. He's sort of got that chip on his shoulder. And a couple of things make me think that the Bills organization sees Josh Norman as their number 2 corner. I mean, first of all, they paid him right away. Like before free agency even started, they went out and they gave Josh Norman a pretty decent contract. It's not a crazy contract. It wasn't some outlandish years, but they gave him $6 million over 1 year. Even if a lot of it isn't a guarantee, about half of it's a guaranteed. That's still a pretty decently big contract to give to a guy like Josh Norman right away, before even seeing what the cornerbacks in free agency wanted, before even seeing what the market for Kevin Johnson was. They clearly value Josh Norman over a guy who played relatively well here in spot duty last year in Kevin Johnson. So there's that. Then on Good Morning Football, Sean McDermott said he was misused in Carolina. He was misused he was making excuses for Josh Norman, which is not something you see a coach like Sean McDermott do. He was literally making excuses for the guy. So between with Sean McDermott's comments on Good Morning Football, Josh Norman going on TMZ and saying he's going to be all world again. I'm not saying he's going to be all world again. Like the previous guy said, if you get 65-70% of what he gave you in Carolina, that's a pretty good cornerback number 2. But I think Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills brass and the coaching staff legitimately think they can make him a serviceable cornerback, whether it be for a year or 2, without having to pay big money or use draft assets for a guy. There was that comment from Paul I want to go back to in the comment section. And I don't want to leave Levi Wallace I don't want to leave Levi Wallace out of this competition by all means. Even though I think Josh Norman has the edge, Levi Wallace is going to get every opportunity to beat Josh Norman out. He's going to get every opportunity. The issues that you've seen in Levi Wallace is the bigger receivers bully him. He's not the most athletic guy in the world. The bigger receivers bully him. He struggles to turn his hips and run down the field with some of the speedier guys. But that being said, he's a very smart, instinctual football player, a guy that's maybe a less aggressive version of a Josh Norman. So he's now coming into year three of NFL weight room, year three of being comfortable in an NFL playbook, year three of NFL coaching. There's something to be said for development. And guys usually don't stick around on rosters for a very long time. How many UDFAs are make it on rosters for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? So there's something to be said for development here. And Levi Wallace, he had a very good rookie year in the back half when he came in for Phillip Gaines. He didn't embarrass himself last year. He struggled in some certain situations, and that's why Kevin Johnson had to come in. So there's something to be said about getting better and improving yourself. So Levi Wallace is going to get every shot to do that. But I do think Josh Norman has the advantage here. But Paul brings up a really interesting comment. Says, I think we draft a cornerback next year. That's something we mentioned on a previous podcast. I believe it was right after the draft, before we, went viral and we decided to be, YouTube people when we were just doing the audio stuff. I believe we made that comment. The longer the Buffalo Bills wait to address cornerback number 2 with draft assets, like a first or a second round pick, the longer they can get away with having a rookie contract across from Trey White. So say the Bills can get away with Josh Norman for this year, and then Levi Wallace the year after that, and then draft a guy in the first or second round 3 years from now. Well, now you're going to have a guy guaranteed on your roster for 5 years at a relatively decent salary, while Trey White is on the other side making so much money. But if the Bills would have used a second round pick on a corner this year, you get 4 years. You get 4 years of a cheap contract. Or next year they use it, you get 4 years of a cheap contract, or 5 years of a cheap contract. The longer you wait to spend draft assets on a corner, the longer you can get by with UDFAs and bargain bin free agents. The less draft capital you have to spend, you can spend that draft capital elsewhere, and you can sort of maybe find your successor to Trey White. So when Trey White's contract runs out, that rookie, whoever you draft 3-4 years from now, he is sort of going into his second contract, and he can take the mantle of CB1. So the long, it's sort of an asset management type of deal. So Paul thinks, I think we draft a cornerback next year. We might, but I wouldn't be surprised if we try to see how long we can take it, not having to spend valuable assets across from Trey White.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point as far as like how you're thinking about your roster construction and where your salaries are concentrated, right? Because like you said, if you had drafted a cornerback high this year, let's say you drafted a corner in the second round, I mean, you've got four years of that contract, and you still haven't paid Trey yet. At the time when that contract comes up, their contracts are going to be pretty much coming up at the same time, right? So you're going to kind of be in a similar situation where like you have to decide what you want to do. So it's not a bad idea to somewhat stagger those potential contracts a little bit.
Yeah, we got a comment here from Dota Tough. He says, finger quotes, draft a corner every year, buddy Nix. I think he's saying that jokingly, but I'm not going to lie.
We did. We drafted Dane Jackson.
Philosophically, I agree with it. Like I know I think this guy's probably saying it as a joke, but I really do. Like if I was an NFL GM, which obviously I'm not, I would draft a corner every year. Whether it be like, unless there's like a year where it's super weird, like you have very few draft picks. I'm talking like 4 or 5. Why not draft a corner every year? Because Dane Jackson, I think, is going to end up making this roster. We're going to talk about some of the role players later on. I think Dane Jackson could have an impact, and I think Dane Jackson could develop into something. And every year you just bring in a better player. I also believe in drafting a quarterback every year. I'm that weirdo who says draft a quarterback every year, because why not? Like, every once in a while you're going to stumble onto something. So half of the draft is a crapshoot. If there's a position that you think is valuable, like corner or quarterback, draft one every year and see if you luck into something, every few years late in the draft. There's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So I know he said that jokingly, but in all seriousness, I don't disagree with it.
No.
All right. That brings us on to our next topic, which is everybody's favorite, nickel corner and sub package roles. I need to sort of eat a little crow here, because before the draft started, I was Mr. Big Nickel, Mr. Buffalo Nickel. I was convinced that the Buffalo Bills were going to draft a safety to play corner. And, I had my eyes on Kyle Duggar. I had my eyes on Jeremy Chin. I was convinced. I will take solace in the fact that according to Joe Biscaglia of The Athletic, who's a pretty connected guy, a guy who doesn't usually go out on a limb and say things like this. So I take his word at face value. He essentially says that the Buffalo Bills had told the staff and the officials at Lenoir Wren that if Kyle Duggar was sitting there at pick number 54, he was the pick. So I take Joe B at his word that Kyle Duggar would have been the pick at 54, but unfortunately he went at pick number 37 to the New England Patriots. Now that leads me to believe that either AJ Epinesa was just higher on their board, or that, Jeremy Chin, maybe they saw him more as a linebacker than a safety, whatever it was. They chose AJ Epinesa, and they did not take a big nickel, and they didn't even take one later in the draft. A guy like Tanner Muse, who maybe went a little higher. He didn't go higher than me and you expected, Dave. We talked about him going high. We projected him as a fourth rounder. He went in the third round, but maybe there just wasn't a lot of talk here. Before we get into that conversation about big nickel and Teron Johnson, Chris here says Levi will strive at nickel. I'm going to have to disagree with you there, Chris, because I think there are some other guys who are going to fit that role. I think that I think Levi is a boundary corner only. I think his only value really comes at the boundary corner position because sorry, I clicked the wrong comment there. I apologize. Because it's like not showing the troubles of, there we go. Levi will strive at nickel. He's not a physical player. Like, he's just not a physical player. And he's the guy who got pushed around by bigger receivers. He's the guy who's kind of tight-hipped. Pierre's got a comment here. Could Dane Jackson be our big nickel corner? And that's something I want to get to. Whether it's Saran Neal or Dean Marlowe continuing in that sub-package role like we saw last year, continuing to develop and go back and forth in that sub-package role. There's, again, something to be said about development. Saran Neal could develop into that big nickel. Dean Marlowe could continue to develop into that big nickel. Or Dane Jackson. He's not the biggest guy in the world at, I believe, 5'10" and about 195. I'd have to double check and look up his size. But what he is known for in his scouting reports, does he have the same negatives as Levi Wallace? Is he a little stiff-hipped? Does he have trouble turning and running with bigger or with faster receivers? Yes. One of the things that people said about Dane Jackson, he is a physical dude. He's not afraid to tackle. He's not afraid to hit you. And that sort of physicality is going to serve you well inside. Dane Jackson is actually one of those corners later in the draft that can play inside and outside. He can play boundary and he can play inside. So yeah, Dane Jackson could be a nickel corner for us, or he could be in the competition for nickel corner. Somebody says, is Saran Neal a cornerback or a safety? I see him as Poyer's backup. He was drafted as a safety, but I think the Bills see him as a corner. They moved him to corner last year. He wasn't listed as a safety last year. He was listed as a corner. He mostly played special teams, but you see guys like Neal and Marlowe coming in these sub packages. So I think it'll be a rotation between Neal and Marlowe. I think Dane Jackson will be allowed to throw his hat in the ring, but I don't think just because we didn't draft a guy, it doesn't mean we're not going to utilize the big nickel position, because I can't picture AJ Klein being on the field more than just obvious running downs. I can't picture, AJ Klein with his lack of athleticism being on the field. I see a lot of 5 DB sets. I mean, who knows? Maybe Jaquan Johnson develops so much as a safety that there's sort of a trio at safety, and they allow, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer to sort of play that big nickel role. Cam Lewis, as Bobby says, is another name to watch. It's going to be an open competition for that big nickel. I don't think that just because we didn't draft a guy or sign a guy, that doesn't mean that we're not going to utilize that big nickel position.
No, I don't think it does either. But I also think what it shows with the comment Joe B made is that the Bills were looking at one particular guy, and if he was there, they were going to take him. Otherwise, they weren't going to be so overly concerned with filling that role. They obviously, if they were going to draft Duggar at 54, were going to have grander visions for him than just playing a big nickel role on this team. So to me, that's why I don't get as worked up about this particular role I mean, it is valuable, but I think that we have, like you've been mentioning, we have like a conglomerate of guys that we can mix and match to potentially fill in that spot. I think, Dane Jackson's probably more of a traditional nickel. He's 6 feet, 190, very similar in stature to a Teron Johnson, who's 5'11", a little over 190. So those two are very similar in stature. So I think those two can compete potentially for the regular nickel spot, but I don't know that Dane's suited to play the big nickel role. I think that's going to be more of someone like a Saron Neal mold who could fill that position. He's going to be a guy that probably is a little bit better towards the line of scrimmage than he is back in coverage. So you like that from a size perspective if he comes in to do something like that. So they have people that can fill some of these up here. Mackenzie Big Nickel. He did play corner, I think, against the Jets. Yeah, you're right. He did. So it's making me laugh. All right. That's funny. But the point being, I think, is that we do have the collection of guys that in the, handful of plays maybe that we need to utilize a big nickel each game, we'll have somebody that could fill that role.
Yeah. I mean, and let's not talk even about big nickel. These guys are mentioning all the depth and stuff that we have. Teron Johnson isn't guaranteed a role next season. I mean, I liked Teron Johnson his rookie season, but here's a guy who is small in stature and likes to play a lot bigger than he is. Like, he thinks he's a big nickel. He throws his body around like he's a big nickel, but he's not a big nickel. He's smaller in size. He gets hurt a lot. He can't stay on the football field. We saw guys like Jamison Crowder work him. So even if it's just Saran Neal and Jaquan Johnson and Dean Marlowe sort of duking it out for a sub-package role as a bigger safety or a bigger nickel, it could be Dane Jackson and Cam Lewis giving Teron Johnson a money in that traditional nickel role. I don't think, despite the fact that we used a 4th-round pick on him, he's not staying healthy. I think Teron Johnson is a guy who is going to see some competition in training camp in that nickel role.
I would love to see Dane Jackson go toe-to-toe with him. And I mean, yeah, you mentioned, that he's had some injury history and he's played bigger. He thinks he's bigger than he is when he's playing. And I mean, he made a nice play in that playoff game against DeAndre Hopkins where it was, questionable. Maybe it was pass interference, maybe it wasn't. He didn't get called for it. So he's got game to him. I'm not going to take that away from him because he is a gamer and he does kind of have that swagger that you want from guys in the secondary, right? You need confidence from cornerbacks, right? You can't be passive. But I also think Dane Jackson as a competitor, and from what we've heard from him in the pre-draft process, as far as his just pure love for football and competitive nature, is he's a guy that I'm going to look for in camp as competing with Teron Johnson for that sort of traditional nickel role because everything you hear about Dane Jackson has been positive, and he's kind of overcome some of his own physical limitations to do what he does. And so I think that he's an option as well. And, Corey, great comment. It's a perfect segue because EJ Gaines is another guy who could play nickel. And EJ Gaines has the flexibility to play outside and inside. So let's not forget about EJ Gaines. Obviously, we worry about him due to his injury history, a lot longer of an injury history than a Teron Johnson. But when he's been healthy, he's been a very solid player. The Bills brought him back. He's only 28 years old. And he does give you some versatility outside and in. And, part of the reason why the Bills probably didn't bring back Kevin Johnson as well. So, look, I like EJ Gaines as a player, but the question for him is always going to be the health, right? Whatever you can get out of him, great. Like, to be determined whether he even makes the final roster. I think that's a conversation we'll have later, but I don't think it's a lot.
Yeah, no, and that was a great point, Corey, because we totally overlooked EJ Gaines. Trust me, he's in our show notes. I just need to make my font bigger next time because we totally glossed over EJ Gaines. The way I envision EJ Gaines' role is, well, first of all, when he first signed, I was super excited about EJ Gaines. I'm like, all right, this guy's going to come in. It's going to be a three-way battle between Levi Wallace and Josh Norman and EJ Gaines for cornerback number 2. May the best man win. If EJ Gaines loses out, he'll go and he'll provide competition for Teron Johnson and nickel. But then in that same Good Morning Football interview with Sean McDermott that he was sort of making excuses for Josh Norman, his comment about how EJ Gaines went about signing was kind of peculiar. He was like, yeah, EJ called us. He's like, I'm healthy. Can you guys give me a shot? So they brought him in for a physical and they looked him out and they gave him a veteran minimum contract. So as much as I think that EJ Gaines could come into training camp and wow everybody, and he could come in and earn a starting spot, earn a position as a role player, I don't know if right now that's something the Bills are counting on or the Bills are even betting on. I think it's something that they think is just an added perk. Something that's like, well, if it happens, great. Happy accident. But it's not something that they're banking on. I think the guys they're banking on are Josh Norman. The guys they're banking on are Saran Neal. The guys they're banking on are Dean Marlowe and Dane Jackson, guys that they've invested, capital on or signed earlier on in the process. That's not saying EJ Gaines can't play a huge role on this team. I love the depth. I mean, the depth is unbelievable. We have, outside of Trey White, you have four guys who can play boundary corner. You have three guys who have done it before and proven it. You have a fourth guy in Dane Jackson who's got the ability to, and then two of those guys, Jackson and Gaines, can kick inside, where you also have Neal and Marlowe, and you got Cam Lewis, and you got Jaquan Johnson. We are so stacked. We are so stacked in that secondary. It really is unbelievable. And what's so great about it is Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde still have 3-4 years left in them. Mm-hmm. So Jaquan Johnson could legitimately sit on this roster and just learn from these two and play a bit role. And then, when Jordan Poyer's contract's up in 3 years, you can probably re-up Jaquan Johnson for a relatively small-ish deal when his rookie contract is up. And who knows, he could turn out to be a guy who is just a special teamer for now, but 3 years from now could be a steal, a starter, just because he got something that so many rookies and so many young guys don't get a chance to do. Sit on a bench and just learn and get years invested in an NFL playbook and an NFL weight room and, surrounded by veterans. So many rookies are just thrown onto the football field and expected to perform right away, and they're cut if they can't. Jaquan Johnson is a guy who just gets to sit there and incubate in the back half of our roster. So that's something that really excites me about guys like Neal and about guys like Johnson, about guys who are now here like Dane Jackson. So these are guys that we're projecting right now. And obviously it is a projection. It's not a guarantee, but it's something exciting.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Jordan Poyer was a 7th-round pick, right? Mm-hmm. And he was a little bit of a late bloomer. I mean, he's still in his 20s, but he was a late bloomer. And, he found a spot. The Bills, found a spot for him, and he blossomed, right? So you like to think that Jaquan Johnson, maybe as a 6th-round pick a year ago, could eventually be the heir apparent there if he continues to learn from arguably the best safety tandem in the league with Hyde and Poyer. If you're Jaquan Johnson, I don't think that as a 6th-round pick, you could really ask to come into a better situation than you are in now. There's not super high expectations on you as the fact is that you're a 6th-round pick and you have the best in the business to learn from. So I'm a big Jaquan Johnson fan. I liked him when we drafted him. I was hyping him up in the preseason last year. I just would like to see him get on the field, but we know that's tough right now because Hyde and Poyer never come off the field. So he's going to have to make his hay on special teams, and I think he'll do that this year. So hoping for some development from him.
All right. Next, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next topic, I want to introduce you guys, the listeners and the viewers, to the Flick Chat app. Seriously, when this vidcast is over, go right away to your phone, download in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, the Flick Chat app. Once you do, join the Buffalo Fanatics channel. You can do so by going to chatwithbf.com. This app is like the Buffalo Bills message boards of old. Twitter and Instagram all rolled into one. The best part is it's all Bills talk all the time. No politics, no TikToks, none of that nonsense. It's all Bills football talk with fellow fanatics like yourself. It's called the Flick Chat app. Download it and join hundreds of fellow Bills fans. We are so close to 1,000 people on there on the Buffalo Fanatics channel. Founders like Rico, Pierre, Bobby, they're all there. There are giveaways galore. It is well worth your time. Trust me. Again, it's the Flick Chat app. Download it and join the hundreds of fellow fans on the Buffalo Fanatics channel. We are almost there at 1,000 people, Dave.
Just checking right now. We're at 993 people. So Ooh. 7 more people, we hit the 1,000 mark. And it's only been up since.
I know Pierre and Bobby are here. So I might say, maybe we got to do a giveaway at 1,000. Do we got to do a giveaway at 1,000, guys?
Yeah, let's see.
Pierre, do we got to do a giveaway at 1,000?
Pierre with the comment there. Let's go.
I might get myself fired by making a comment like that. I shouldn't be promising things, but hey, Chris throw it out there, right? There we go.
Chris is getting
If we get to 1,000 right now, thank you, Chris. If we get to 1,000 tonight, we'll Pierre's on board. We'll do a giveaway.
Yeah, we'll do a giveaway. That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, the Flick Chat app's cool because if you don't have it yet, I think probably most of the people listening to us probably already have it, but it's really cool. You can go on there. There's different topics. You can set custom notifications to get notified when there's a topic that you're really interested in. You get notification. You can kind of mute out the other stuff. There's a lot of polls on there. You can vote. There's like I think Bobby even put a quiz on there the other day. So it's pretty cool stuff you can do on there.
All right. That brings us to our last segment for the evening. Anybody out there in the comments section, you got a question, you got a topic you want to discuss, you guys control this show. So leave your responses in the comments. We'll put it up on the screen and, we'll discuss it. We'll answer questions, whatever you guys want to do. And remember, as always, we appreciate the super chatters. So if you super chat, you were guaranteeing your topic or your question are getting talked about or answered. So if you guys got anything for us, put it out there in the chat section for us right now. And while you're doing that,
I'll say this. While they're doing that, there was a really good comment made, another good comment made by Dota Tough right before we went to the Q&A on the special team stats with Neal and Johnson. So obviously you see they're two highest on the team is what this user mentioned, 58-47. So, again, we like Hyde and Poyer, and Neal and Johnson are earning their stripes in special teams. So let's go to the comments now. Linebacker depth. Okay.
I like this one because I don't think this one, we have our shows for the next couple of weeks pegged out, and I don't think linebacker depth is on the agenda. So this is a great thing to talk about right now. We had this conversation. Before the draft. I was convinced, based on some of the names that the Buffalo Bills were talking to in the pre-draft process, guys like Chris Orr and guys like Shaquille Quarterman, that the Bills were primed to add another strong side linebacker to the roster, someone to sit behind AJ Klein, somebody to sort of who can be a middle linebacker, strong side linebacker backup, a guy who 2 or 3 years could develop into a replacement for AJ Klein, a guy who could play special teams. I thought we were one linebacker away, and I really want to see a guy like Voshon Joseph be weak side linebacker only to sort of hedge our bets against Matt Milano leaving. But who knows? Maybe the Bills have different plans. Maybe Tyler Matakevich is more than a special teamer. Maybe they're seeing things from Tyrell Dodson, the UDFA last year, that they like. He could play that middle linebacker, strong side linebacker backup role. Maybe they think, Andrew Miller says Voshon waiting in the weeds. Maybe the Bills, if they're not comfortable with the big nickel, they'll put 2 weak side linebackers out there, like Matt Milano and Voshon Joseph, 2 smaller linebackers, 2 sideline linebackers, 2 guys who can drop back into pass coverage. Maybe we see more. Maybe we just see more smaller linebackers out there. So I don't hate our linebacker depth. I just wish we probably would have added one more strong side linebacker, but they greatly improved it with Klein replacing Lorenzo. I don't want to say replacing, but filling the role of Lorenzo Alexander, at least on the running downs. Tyler Matakevich should play special teams. You got Corey Thompson, you got Voshon Joseph, you got Tyrell Dodson. There are some bodies back there, but if Edmonds or Milano go down, it's going to be a struggle to replace them. Yeah,
and I mean, look, Matakevich is an upgrade at on special teams. I mean, Julian Stanford, for all the bashing we give him, he was like a pretty good special teams player, but I think Matakevich is even an upgrade over Stanford now with him not there at special teams. And Matakevich may add something for you on defense. That's to be determined. I mean, we know that based on the Brandon Beane press conference that they didn't really have familiarity with Matakevich at all. They didn't have any real connection with him other than what they knew about him on special teams. So there wasn't anybody on the coaching staff who knew about him or whatever. They just went purely based on what they saw from him on special teams on tape, and they felt strong enough about what they saw that they were going to go sign him. So I think they have they have some plans for him potentially to even do more. And Voshon is the key, right? Like Alexander's gone, right? So I'm not as big on AJ Klein. I think he's super limited athletically. I don't know that I think he's a downgrade from Lorenzo Alexander. I don't know, but I think the rest of the group in totality, if Voshon steps up this year, you still have Corey Thompson, you brought Matakevich, and is probably a little bit stronger than it was last year at this point in time.
All right, we got a question from from Davion Price. He says, do you guys think we will be okay at O-line? I'm actually going to tell you right now, Davion, that's actually going to be our topic for Monday's show. We're going to go through the entire offensive line. So tune in Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern here on YouTube, and we'll go more in depth. But the one-word answer is yes, and the two-word answer is hell yes. So I mean, we will be okay along the offensive line. The next question from Andrew Miller is, when does Trent Murphy get cut? Is he just a camp body and waiting for final cuts? I don't see him being on the team. Too many other bodies. Dave, what are your thoughts here? I know I have a couple of takes, but I want to hear what you think first.
I mean, look, the drafting of AJ Epinesa with our first pick in this year's draft is a little bit telling, right? I think that had we passed on AJ Epinesa and went for a Christian Fulton, right, or a Jeremy Chin in that spot, then you may have seen a little bit more safety there of Trent Murphy making the team. His number looms large, right? But it's not that it's not like the Bills are really hard up against the cap. So that's the one thing that we have to remember here is like Trent Murphy getting cut at this stage is not necessarily going to be because we're so tough up against the cap. It's going to be just because he just doesn't make the team. Unless, and I'll say this now, unless between now and training camp, the Bills do go out and bring in, I'll call it a somewhat premier type pass rusher that's still out on the market, either an Everson Griffin or a Jadeveon Clowney, that would seal Trent Murphy's fate. I don't think his fate is sealed quite yet, but it's dangerously close.
It's tough because on one hand, I understand what the Bills are going to do. They're going to bring him to training camp. They're going to let him compete. Nothing is given to anybody, et cetera, et cetera. Who knows? Even with what's surrounding Ed Oliver, maybe, AJ Epinesa might have to play a little bit of defensive tackle.
Or Quentin Jefferson might have to play defensive tackle as well, which we think he will anyway. But
yeah, so I understand all of these things, but at the same time, you also want to have some veteran courtesy. And yes. I think veteran courtesy goes a long way in the locker room. So I think the Bills are going to bring him into training camp. But if AJ Epinesa shows that he's ready to go from day one at left end, I think Mario Addison is going to be sort of a trick player, like a gadget player. As weird as that sounds for a guy who's making, $13 million, he's a guy I can see them putting over the middle and rushing up the middle from standing up from like the sort of those gap blitzes. You saw him do a little bit of that in Carolina. I see Addison as a guy they'll flip from left side to right side. I see Addison as a guy they'll stand up. I see Addison as sort of like there is going to be the guy whose job it is to wreak havoc. That's what I think Mario Addison's role is. And I don't know if that's a starting role. That's sort of a guy who's going to come in, be fresh, and just his only job is just going to make the quarterback's life a living hell. That's going to be Mario Addison's job. And I think we'll talk about that more in depth next week. I believe we're talking about the defensive line next week too.
Yeah. That's a lot of money to pay for a guy that's not really being on the team.
But if he's wreaking havoc on your quarterback, like the other team's quarterback, he's opening things up for the secondary. It's worth it. But that's the thing is you want to have your sturdy, trusty, set the edge, get you your 6 to 7 sacks, not embarrass himself left end. And if AJ Epinesa can prove that from day one, if Daryl Johnson can come in and show that he's bulked up and he can handle more of a role this year outside of just special teams, whether it's Jonathan Woodard or Mike Love, whoever, I think that the veteran sort of the move that will be popular in the locker room, the move that will get you some respect is cutting the guy early and giving him sort of a chance to go lock on somewhere else. Because there's only 4, 8, I think 9 guys max you can keep along this defensive line.
Yeah, no, I think in 9, right? We only kept 8 last year, I believe. And so like you're thinking, where's that 9th guy going to be? He's going to be in the interior on the edge. And you pretty much know that, Hughes, Addison, and Epinesa are 3 locks on the edge. So who's that 4th guy going to be? Is it going to be Trent Murphy, right? Is it going to be, are they going to consider Quentin Jefferson a tackle, right? So like, who's it going to be? So we'll see.
Dota Tough. He said the cover 1 interview with Zoe, he had high praise for Addison taking his job. I agree with that to an extent. Addison's going to take Lorenzo Alexander's role as a pass rusher. He's not going to be plugged and played just like Lorenzo Alexander was. Lorenzo Alexander was a freaking unicorn, man. That guy could play special teams. That guy could play along the defensive line with his hand down. That guy could rush the passer with his hand up. That guy could drop back into coverage. He could do everything. He was a freak. Mario Addison is not the freak of an athlete that Lorenzo Alexander is. He will replace the void that Lorenzo Alexander made as a stand-up pass rusher. Because Mario Addison, we've seen him do it in a 4-3 in Carolina, and we've seen him do it in a 34. He still had 9.5 sacks as a 34 outside linebacker. So you know he can do it with his hand in the ground, and you know he can do it standing up. So he's going to play a similar role to Lorenzo Alexander. He's just not going to play all the roles that Lorenzo Alexander did, because AJ Klein's going to be in there on the goal line. AJ Klein's going to be in there on rundowns. It's going to be Addison's job to fill that role that Lorenzo Alexander did as a pass rusher. And that's where I was getting to, where I could see him, lining up in the A gap, lining up over the middle, sort of that stuff where you're standing right above the offensive line in the middle of the field and rushing the passer that way. They're going to move Addison a lot around. He's going to be a chess piece pass rusher, which is something I thought they might have done with Jerry Hughes in the past. So it should be pretty interesting to see how that defensive line shakes out. And I can't wait to have this conversation more in depth. I believe next Thursday we're talking about it.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great. One of my favorite topics.
Right. I believe we had one more question in there. Where was the other kind of question we had in there? Did you see any other questions in there?
Let's see. Let's scroll it up here. Okay, here's a good one. If there's one star player on a roster that doesn't get re-signed, who do you think it might be? From Jonathan Provost.
That is a tough, because I love them all.
It's a good question though. I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you who I think it is. I'll tell you.
You go.
I think it's Deion Dawkins. And I don't know if we're considering him a star player, but he is the starting left tackle. And I love Deion Dawkins, but something tells me that we're going to replace him with someone either through the draft or in free agency. And I hate to say that, because you think about the other two or three guys we need to sign, and it's Tremaine Edmonds, it's Trey White, it's Josh Allen, right? Like when their contracts are up. The only other guy I can maybe consider here is Matt Milano, but I don't think Edmonds is getting out that door. I don't think White's getting out that door. Allen's certainly not, as far as the trajectory he's on. So that kind of leaves, maybe it's a Matt Milano or a Deion Dawkins that maybe doesn't get re-signed.
Dota Tough says, I'm guessing Milano. Chris says, let's Schno. Jonathan agrees. He thinks it's Deion. Here's my thing with Deion Dawkins is Deion Dawkins is very much, he was part of Sean McDermott's inaugural draft class.
Yep.
He sort of is a very processy guy, a guy who's improved every single year, a guy who's got great work habits, a guy who's really improved his game and bought into the culture. He's a locker room guy. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it so tough to move from him.
It's tough.
But at the same time, the only other person I can think of is Matt Milano. Yep. And you know what's more important than a great locker room guy and a left tackle is, to Sean McDermott, is linebackers who can go sideline to sideline and do a lot of things. And I think Matt Milano is so key to what Sean McDermott has to do. So I honestly think if Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane had to choose between the two, I think they're going Dawkins. Maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way they can get them both. John Holbert says Matt Milano is a draft steal, who is not easy to find again. There's a lot of guys every year with his skill set. I'm a big fan of weak side linebackers, Matt Milano type of linebackers, those linebackers that weigh in at 225 pounds. Maybe it all depends on how Voshan Joseph delivers this year in training camp and what he shows on the football field. But
well, the reality is that at this stage in the game, you have to pay Deion Dawkins probably top 10 left tackle money if you want to re-sign him. Even if you don't think he's a top 10 left tackle in the NFL, that's just the way things work in the NFL. You're going to have to give him something along the lines of like a Jake Matthews contract where he's going to get $75 million, right? And he's going to get $35 million guaranteed, whatever it ends up being. Like that's the type of contract you're looking at, I think, to sign Deion Dawkins long-term as that's just the price you have to pay for a premier position like left tackle, I think, even if you're not a top 5.
Yeah. And it's, you think about it too, Josh Allen is your quarterback, and Josh Allen is a quarterback that is known for buying time with his feet. So I think that's sort of, the Bills' philosophy in drafting Cody Ford, who's got that sort of guard tackle flex. Thank you so much. You're going to need to, put the grammar in there for me. I'm going to go with Dota Tough. Dota Tough. You think that's Dota Tough, Dave?
Dota Tough, yeah, that seems, or
right.
do tough. I don't know.
You're gonna have to enunciate that in the comment section for us so we don't get it wrong. But if you think about it, the Bills' philosophy at right tackle with Cody Ford is that Josh Allen is the kind of quarterback who can buy him time. So they want those bigger, bulkier offensive linemen, guys who can push guys around in the run game, because they know in the pass game Josh Allen can buy himself some time. So if Josh Allen can buy himself some time and Sean McDermott's thinking to himself that linebacker is super important to his defense, maybe they let the left tackle walk too. But
doesn't that sound so like wrong? Doesn't it feel wrong to say that like a weak side linebacker is more important than a left tackle? I don't know.
Yeah, it does. But like Sean McDermott, I think most of his scheme is reliant on, like, our defense is funneled through. I love Trey White. But our defense is funneled through four guys, and it's the middle of that defense. Edmonds, Milano, Hyde, and Poyer. Those are the engines that run our offense or our defense. Those are the guys who make it work. Those are the guys who are just every play, know exactly where to be, what play to make. They can go sideline to sideline. They can make plays anywhere on the field.
Well, let's hope we just re-sign all of them, because I don't think we're giving Dawkins enough credit for like his play last year a little bit, because the fact is we didn't hear about him, which I think was a good thing, right? He wasn't getting blown by. He wasn't like giving up huge sacks. So, and like you said, he's great in the locker room. So I do like Dawkins. It's hard for me. I don't know. It's hard for me to project right now which one of these guys they won't pay, but Roshan's development could play a factor in that very well.
And this is, and thank you, Jonathan, for the kind words, and thank you for the question, because this is some of my favorite stuff to talk about, because roster building just fascinates me, because the Buffalo Bills are going to get to a point in the next 3-4 years. Deion Dawkins, Matt Milano, Trey White, Tremaine Edmonds, Josh Allen, you name it, Devin Singletary,
Ed Oliver.
They're going to get to this point in the next 4 or 5 years where you're going to start picking and choosing. It's going to start being Sophie's choice, and you're going to have to start, instead of trading up and getting aggressive in the draft, you're going to have to start trading down and accumulating draft picks, and you're going to have to start filling your like our roster is stacked right now, and we're able to stack the roster because we don't have to pay all of these guys. We don't have to pay the franchise quarterback. We don't have to pay, the franchise middle linebacker right now. We don't have to pay these guys. We don't have to pay them. They're on rookie deals. Once you have to pay them, you're not going to be able to have the depth we have in the secondary. You're not going to be able to have the number of wide receivers that we have. You're going to have to draft them. You're going to have to find guys off the street, not just the dust settlers that Doug Whaley likes to talk about, but the dust settlers. You're going to have to fill the back half of your roster with guys people never heard of, or guys that real draft nicks have heard of. So it's going to get to that point in the next 4 or 5 years. So it's going to be really interesting to see.
Well, it's like
who the Bills decide to build this franchise around, and whether that's the right decision or not.
It kind of, think of it as a scale, right? It's like, as Josh Allen's ascending, and we hope he continues to ascend, you try to do as much around him as you can while he's still developing, while he's still on that rookie deal. And then you hope that at the time that his rookie deal comes up, you are at the point where Josh Allen has, like, quote, arrived, and he is the guy that's carrying your team and covering up for maybe some of those roster deficiencies that we don't have now, right? So you're the scale is kind of rotating that direction. Hopefully you get to that point. And we saw it happen with Seattle, did it with Russell Wilson as he was on his rookie contract and he got the big money, and now he's carrying that team. We've seen it with other teams as well, right? So that's the scale, and we'll see how it ends up playing out, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, because Jonathan, again, he says, can we financially re-sign all them? Like, I don't want to say no, because my comment before this whole COVID thing would have been, well, the salary cap goes up every year. Like, maybe we should stop worrying about contracts as much as you do. I worry about contracts all the time, but with this whole COVID thing, if there are no fans in the stands next year, if they play football but with no fans next year, they're losing $5.5 billion. $5.5 billion the National Football League is losing. That's going to affect the salary cap. That's going to do things that's going to affect the way the NFL functions, whether we like it or not. So that should be interesting as well. But who knows? Going into the future, maybe it is feasible to start re-signing all those guys.
Yeah, and Pierre's question here about Brady taking team-friendly deals for so many years. Once Josh do, would he take a? I don't think Josh is going to take a hometown discount on his first contract after his rookie deal.
Mm-hmm.
Brady got paid for years and years and years, big money, and obviously Brady's made a lot of money off the field as well with endorsements, and like Josh isn't quite there yet. So I think his first contract after his rookie deal, no, I don't think he would.
I think I'd have to look into this too. I don't know if Tom Brady did his rookie deal or his first contract after his rookie deal. I don't know if that one was team friendly or not, but I think you hit the nail on the head with endorsements. I think Josh Allen, like if Josh Allen goes out this season and balls out like Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, the endorsements will come in, and then maybe we can have a different conversation. Mm-hmm. But as much as we as Bills fans and we as Bills Mafia like to get upset when people diss our small market, there's some reality to it, to the fact that Josh Allen isn't going to get the corporate sponsorships the corporate sponsorship deals that Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers gets because of sort of the team that he's on. Now, if Josh Allen goes out and he can play himself into that, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But if Josh Allen finds himself as like a Matthew Stafford type of quarterback, which I'd be okay with, if Josh Allen turns himself into a mobile Matt Stafford, I'm ecstatic. But that's not going to get him endorsement deals. That's not going to get him money. That's good. Then he's going to have to get his money from the football team. So, Josh Allen seems like the kind of guy that would take that. That he seems like a guy who would maybe take that discount, but only if those endorsements are there. I think, he's got to be, fiscally responsible too. And you're right. Kansas City's not that big, but Patrick Mahomes is that big. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar, Baltimore's not even a big market.
No. Patrick Mahomes is the MVP through 50 touchdowns 2 years ago, and he's probably the best player in the NFL right now, right? So
Indianapolis isn't even that big of a market. Peyton Manning made himself larger than life. Patrick Mahomes is making himself larger than life. Mm-hmm. If Josh Allen, Tom Brady made himself larger than life and had the New England market to go along with it. Aaron Rodgers made himself larger than life and had the Green Bay, even though it's a really small market.
But the history of Green Bay is there.
Imagine for a second. I mean, we remember Mitch Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky, after he had that year in Chicago, he was the talk of the town. Not because Josh Allen's year last year was better than Mitch Trubisky's year in year 2. But Josh Allen isn't getting the love that Mitch Trubisky got because Mitch Trubisky played in Chicago. You
remember that conversation we had.
Not that great of a quarterback. He plays in Los Angeles.
But you remember that conversation we had where we're like, hey, if Josh Allen had in his second year, the year Mitch Trubisky had, we'd be happy. And we're like, oh yeah, we'd be happy. And then Mitch Trubisky fell off a cliff. They didn't even pick up his 5th-year option. So there you go. Now that's the thing. Cannot fall off a cliff. Cannot fall off a cliff. Mm-hmm. So we're going down a rabbit hole there, but
yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen. This has been fun. If you ever miss us, we got another question here. Do you think we ride with 3 QBs? Is there a chance Barkley gets cut to save a roster spot? I believe I mentioned this on the podcast right before we went to video form. I think that there's no way, as much as I think that Matt Barkley was Barkley, as much as I think that Jake Fromm was a luxury pick, I can't see us cutting a 5th-round pick after year 1. I think it's going to be a situation where Jake Fromm comes in and has every chance to unseat Matt Barkley. And if he unseats Matt Barkley, you cut Matt Barkley and Jake Fromm's your number 2. And if he can't, you hold that roster spot for Jake Fromm unless he absolutely embarrasses himself. Because I have a hard time believing that, number 1, Jake Fromm would make it to the practice squad. Mm-hmm. And number 2, I think he would sign on another team's practice squad before he re-signed in Buffalo. I think he would look for an opportunity where there's a weaker starting quarterback, and I think he would sign before. I think he would go to another team's practice squad before he came back to Buffalo's practice squad. So, if you want to keep Jake Fromm, I think you got to keep him on the roster. I don't think there's any path for him staying in Buffalo long term if he's on the practice squad. What are your thoughts there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, look, what you do there is you look at this and you're like, okay, you draft him in the 5th round. There's going to be a team that's going to want to pick him up. There's going to be a chance for him to want to, he's going to have better opportunity to potentially work his way into a starting job on another team. They can try to practice squad him, but he's going to likely either go to another team or get picked up by another team on his own accord. So I think what you have to do if you're set on keeping him is you find that like 9th offensive lineman or that 9th defensive lineman that's practice squad eligible, or maybe that 7th wide receiver that you maybe were considering keeping, or that 6th or 7th linebacker, and you throw whoever's practice squad eligible at the bottom of your roster onto the practice squad, and then you just keep Jake Fromm on the final. I think that's what you'll have to do. Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned you can practice squad Fromm. The point we're trying to get at is, let's just use New England as an example here. The Bills decide that Matt Barkley's their backup quarterback, and they cut Jake Fromm. They don't just unilaterally get to decide to put Jake Fromm on their practice squad. Jake Fromm gets a decision now. First of all, Jake Fromm gets put on waivers. A team can pick him up. Say he clears waivers. He's a free agent. The Bills don't get his rights. They don't get his dibs. Say New England comes to calling and they say, hey, Jake, we have Jared Stidham as our starting quarterback and Brian Hoyer as our backup. Would you like to come to New England and be on our practice squad instead? If I'm Jake Fromm, I'm going to New England. Like, that's just I'm sorry.
And
Jared
the reason
is not the guarantee that Josh Allen is, and Brian Hoyer is like 100 years old as the backup. There's a chance that Jake Fromm could start by the end of the year.
And I think the point is that we become accustomed to seeing players go back to the team that they were on during camp, because that's the system they were in. That's the system they're familiar with. So they're naturally going to kind of go back to that team's practice squad, because most cases, like if they go to another team's practice squad, they're going to have to learn the system again, and they're going to be behind the curve against other guys that they're competing for on the practice squad. It's a little bit different, I think, in this situation with quarterback.
Jake Fromm has never been a backup, never in his life. Like, that was one of the things he said. He's like, I've never been a backup. He'll say all the good things. He'll say all the right things in front of the camera. But Jake Fromm was pissed when the Buffalo Bills drafted him. He was not happy, because there is no path for Jake Fromm to become a starting quarterback here in Buffalo. And he's never been a backup before. Like, he wants to be the guy. He wants to be the starter. So,
and I agree with John's comment here, right? If he beats out Matt Barkley, then it is only 2 quarterbacks, rightfully so.
Yes. Yes. No, I agree with everyone there. So thank you guys so much. Somebody mentioned Delaney Walker as well. I wouldn't mind it. But I think the Bills are pretty set with tight ends. We'll hit on tight ends a little bit when we talk about offensive line on Monday. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. We are 3 away from 1,000 on the Flick Chat. If I still had a voice, I would maybe do like a sort of marathon where we just wouldn't stop talking until we hit to 1,000. But there will not be a show tomorrow, Chris. We air Mondays and we air Thursdays, 9 p.m. right here on, it seems like you are watching on YouTube. So every Monday and Thursday, 9 p.m. on YouTube, we will be here for you. Next week, we'll be talking about the offensive line and the defensive line. We appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for all the super chatters out there today. He said one of us was right, and I don't know which one he said was right. I'm going to go with Dota Tough. Thank you. I appreciate it, guys. Chris, John, all you guys who were commenting back and forth. We really appreciate it. This show is only getting better because of great questions like that. Like, I really enjoyed that last 25 minutes there. That was a lot of fun. So until next time, check us out tomorrow morning on the Buffalo Fanatics Podcasting Network. Check out all our other great podcasts as well. Till next time, Dave, go Bills.
Go Bills.